Sure.
Let's bring in CNN safety analyst David Soucie via Skype from Denver, Colorado. He's a former FAA safety inspector. David, with Boeing, if Boeing really thought that the plane was going to fly again in a month and a half or 2 months, don't you think they would keep this going? And I mean, they would keep the production of the plane. And if they're suspending production, does that mean they believe the plane might not get off the ground soon or at all?
Well, I think it's a matter, as Renee pointed out, they simply have no place to put these other aircraft that they're manufacturing. I was up there earlier this month. Yeah, it really is. I was up there earlier this month, and they had reduced the production. You could see the holes in the production line. I was in the production line watching them go through it. It's really admirable, and I'm very proud of this industry right now. We talk a lot about putting safety first above profits, and oftentimes that's not what happens. In this case, it really is. It's not only Boeing behind this, it's also Steve Dickson, the FAA administrator. They've really made a firm commitment. It's the first time in my career I've seen such a pledge of honesty and openness about this. They invited me up there. I was there for 3 days at Boeing. And they were
David, I'm going to jump in at this juncture, and I think Isa and I probably both want to say the same thing.
We both probably on the same thing, which is what you said. You are proud of the industry at the moment, putting profits before safety. But, you know, was it last week? I can't remember if it was like last week, David, correct me if I'm wrong, that we heard from the whistleblower, Ed Pearson, who testified of employing fatigue, of chaos, of mistakes, of cutting corners, of pressure, of disarray at the factory. I mean, it was a pretty damning
testimony. And of bringing his concerns to Boeing management. This doesn't feel like a proud moment either for the industry or Boeing or for the FAA, for that matter.
Well, when we talk about whistleblowers, those are individual incidents, individual things. What I'm talking about is what I've seen from the top down. Now, what's happening at the bottom up, I understand there's probably issues there. There still is. There was when I was there 10 years ago looking at it, and that's gotten better. But what my point is about what I'm proud of today is the fact that the top management has not said, look, we're going to get this thing out. We're going to move it forward. I didn't see any evidence of that. And I was inside the factory talking to the employees, talking to the manufacturing line, open discussions, everybody I talked to, and I talked to a lot of people up there in the 3 days I was there. Nobody there had anything to say about that. In fact, if there's any kind of pressure,
because it's not in their hands anymore, David. It's not, you know, whether the plane gets off the ground is not in their hands anymore. It's not their decision.
No,
so
it never was. It never was in their hands anymore. What was in their hands was what they did about it and how they tried to fix it. Let me tell you a little bit of what I saw there. So we went there. I was in the flight simulator with observing what was going on there, looking and testing and asking them to do different things with the flight simulator. So we went in and we looked to the checklists. At the same time I was there, they were doing these flight tests that they were talking about with the FAA. So they had checklists. They had independent pilots that came in, went through these checklists, and they didn't follow them the same way. The intent is that every pilot would respond in the same way. That didn't happen. And because that didn't happen is why these airplanes are not flying right now. That's exactly the reason that they're working on it right now. And they're not putting anything ahead. They're not saying, well, it's acceptable to have one pilot not follow the checklist properly. No, they're not. They're saying every pilot has to. And that's why they're not putting these airplanes out. So, you know, I've never been on this side before. I've always been on the side of safety. I've always been on the side of saying, look, if they're cutting corners, they will. And I'll be honest with you, if they were cutting corners, if I saw any evidence of that, and I've been doing surveillance on manufacturers for over 30 years, and I've seen it every time I went in. This time I didn't, and it's the very first time I've seen that. So it's all the way from the top to the bottom, and I can see there's whistleblowers, there's other issues that probably still need to be addressed. But the fact is, from the top down and everybody that I talked to there, I didn't see any evidence of that whatsoever.
David, very quickly, how long do you think they'll spend production for?
I think they'll suspend it until they finally get these things back in service, which, as Renee said, I'm in agreements with her that February, March, even April is pushing it a little bit because of the fact that the litmus test for getting this thing right is so fine. It's such a precise process for how this is going to be done that it's got to be perfect, and they know it. And so they're not going to put this out before it's ready.
David, I know we got to run, but would you be comfortable getting back on that plane if and when it's approved to fly again?
Absolutely at this point. And you know, I was the first one to say I would not. I talked about my granddaughter being on the plane before. And I would never do that. But now I've flown in the air simulator. I've seen exactly what they did to make the fixes. I've actually seen the wires that they changed and the software that they changed. And at this point, I feel that the level of safety with the MCAS and the 737 MAX is ready to fly.
David Soucie, I appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Great to see you, David.
Thank you.
And of course, that's just first if it gets to approvals, the FAA, and then it has Europe. Europe will then approve it.
As Richard Quest has been at pains to point out, multiple different regulatory bodies
so this
around
is
the
just
world.
the beginning. We'll see. Now, in Washington.